Syracuse football is making a ton of lineup changes ahead of its Saturday matchup against Holy Cross.
You are Locked On Syracuse, your daily podcast on the Syracuse Orange. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, everyone, and welcome into Locked On Syracuse. I'm Jackson Holzer, and thank you for making us your first listen of every single day here on the Locked On Podcast Network. We're your team every day, and we're free and available wherever you get your podcasts. And on today's show, Syracuse football released its depth chart for Holy Cross, and my goodness, Fran Brown is not afraid to make changes with this lineup. We're going to talk about the receiver shakeup. We're also going to talk about the defense in general because there are so many changes on the defense. And then I'm going to give you my overall thoughts and why I ultimately support the decision to shake up the lineup a bit. And it's not necessarily just because Syracuse lost last game, but hey, this is different circumstances with Holy Cross coming to town. I support these lineup decisions that Fran Brown and company have made. So, this episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Place your first $5 bet, and you'll get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. So once again, Syracuse and Holy Cross play this Saturday at noon, and the Orange released their depth chart for the game. And normally when they release a depth chart, aside from the very first one of the season, there's nothing too crazy about it. But for whatever reason, this one has a ton of lineup changes to talk about. So we're going to go over all of it here on today's podcast, and we're going to start off with the receiver shakeup. Syracuse football now has a new number one wide receiver. That's right. There's a new one, and it might not be who you think. It is, if you haven't already seen it on Twitter, it is Jackson Meeks, the Georgia transfer from this offseason, one of two Georgia transfer wide receivers this offseason, is going to get his chance to be the wide receiver one for Holy Cross this Saturday. Now, this is in large part because Zeed Haynes, the incumbent wide receiver one on this team, the normal wide receiver one on this team, is out right now due to personal matters. Don't know much to the extent of it. That is what we know for sure, though. That is the fact. We just got to hope that everything is okay. It is not disciplinary. When we know he is going to come back, I will let you guys know. But in the meantime, Syracuse football has a new wide receiver one in Jackson Meeks. For the first 3 games of the season, Jackson Meeks, I believe, was listed as the wide receiver 4 behind Zeed Haynes. But then Zeed Haynes obviously out. Jackson Meeks steps in, and then there's a backup behind Jackson Meeks, which I believe on the depth chart, if last I looked at it, was Daryl Gill, who also had a pretty good game against Stanford. Now, as I already mentioned, Jackson Meeks is a transfer from Georgia. He is a senior in his 4th season, and he's right now 4th on the team in receiving yards. But it's also because he doesn't often get the ball thrown to him. But when he has gotten the ball thrown to him, he has looked pretty productive. He had that touchdown at the end of the game against Stanford that gave Syracuse its first lead. It was a nice route run by Jackson Meeks, and he took it all the way into the end zone from about 15 yards out. So it was a nice play that he made there. And this season, he has 115 receiving yards, which is almost as much as he had in his first 3 seasons combined. So he is already having a career year, and he is on pace to shatter his career numbers coming into this season, which we all kind of expected because, well, he didn't really play much at Georgia, but we knew he would get more opportunities at Syracuse. And now he is getting the ultimate opportunity as the wide receiver one. So he's going to see a lot more playing time, hopefully get a lot more targets. And this is a game where, hey, maybe we can learn a little bit about Jackson Meeks, even though it is an FCS opponent in Holy Cross. So Jackson Meeks is the wide receiver one for this team for this upcoming game. That is the big headline with the receiver shakeup, but there is more. There is more. There is another big name on the depth chart for this week. First time he has been on the depth chart as an active player, and that is Justus Ross Ross-Simmons. That's right. He is back. Now, I want to clarify what I mean by back. I mean, he's actually back on the depth chart as a starting, or not necessarily a starting wide receiver, but on the lineup depth chart. Because I don't think he was on the depth chart for that game against Stanford. Now, granted, he played. He did play against Stanford. He is number 12 on offense, so you didn't see him a whole lot, and your eyes would be correct on that because he only played 12 snaps in the entire game. He is a Colorado State transfer. We had high hopes for him. I was thinking he could be the wide receiver too heading into this season, but he dealt with a hamstring injury at the end of training camp and into the regular season. He was good enough and he was healthy enough to play against Stanford, but only 12 snaps. It seems as though the coaching staff is keeping him on a pitch count a little bit. But then this week, he is on the depth chart as the wide receiver 5 behind Umari Hatcher. And he's back. It's good to have another weapon on the field for this team. We've talked about the receivers ad nauseum and how they seem to be a lot better than in years past. This team has a lot of weapons, and they can use a guy like Justus Ross-Simmons, especially because Zeed Haynes is out. He didn't. Now, granted, Syracuse's passing attack was still good against Stanford, even with Justus Ross-Simmons not fully in the lineup, not fully integrated yet. But just imagine how much better it can be with him integrated into the lineup. This was a pretty good player at Colorado State. He had 700 yards last year with Colorado State. Okay, he's pretty good. He was sought after by a lot of programs this offseason other than Syracuse. I think the other front runner for him was the University of Florida, who they could use a lot, quite frankly. But point being, Justus Ross-Simmons, the main takeaway here is that he is back and he is healthy. He is on the depth chart. Hopefully he doesn't suffer any setbacks. And it'll be nice to hopefully see him on the field more than just 12 snaps against Holy Cross. So the big receiver shakeup, if you will, Jackson Meeks, the wide receiver number 1, getting his first opportunity maybe in his college life to be a wide receiver 1. And number 2, Justus Ross-Simmons is back on the depth chart. Not listed as a starter, but he is on the depth chart. He is in the lineup. He should be good to go for Saturday. Hopefully no setbacks. Hopefully he is 100% ready to go for Holy Cross and for the rest of this season. So obviously good things to see with the wide receivers. Now coming up, the defense. Oh boy. There are a lot of changes to go over. Not necessarily bad, but there's a lot of changes to talk about. You know, last week when I recorded that postcast at the end of the Syracuse and Stanford game, it was a late game. And I was a little bit tired when I had to record that. But you know what fixes tired? 5-hour energy. 5-hour energy fixes tired fast. Whether you have a long list to do for work or a list of DIY projects to tackle at home, take a 5-hour energy shot so you can check everything off your list. If you are like me, you always have a large list of projects for the home. When you get your supplies for the project, do not forget the most essential supply, which is a 5-hour energy shot. With zero sugar and a convenient portable size, it's the perfect pick-me-up for getting stuff done. The 5-Hour Energy website has flavors galore like watermelon, tropical burst, grape berry, and more. There is a flavor for everyone. Try them all. And on the site, you have the option to build your own 12-pack or 24-pack. You choose the flavors, and it is delivered right to your door. If you go to 5hourenergy.com, that is the number 5hourenergy.com, and get some 5-Hour Energy product today. You can use my promo code LOCKEDONCFB to receive 20% off your order. This offer is only valid until September 30th, so that's 6 days on one order and cannot be used with other promotions. The code is not good on subscription orders. Go to 5hourenergy.com today. Once again, Syracuse football released its depth chart for its Saturday matchup at noon against Holy Cross. We just went over the wide receivers. Now let's just talk about the defense in general, the whole unit, because the whole unit got shaken up a little bit in large part for what happened, what went right, what went wrong against Stanford. So the staff, they're not afraid to make changes, guys. Let's start off with number 1. true freshman, 4-star Marcellus Barnes is officially a starting corner for Syracuse football, at least for this week. At least for this week. For the first few games of the season, he was listed as a starter, but he would be in him and Devin Grant would be together on the depth chart, and it would be Marcellus Barnes or Devin Grant or Marcellus Barnes. There was that word "or" in the middle of their two names, so they would rotate back and forth. However, on this depth chart, there is no "or." Marcellus Barnes is listed as a starting cornerback on this team. He is ahead of the next person, which is Greg Delane, also coming back from injury, but there's no "or" there. There's no "or." Marcellus Barnes is a starting corner, and this staff might view Marcellus Barnes as the overall cornerback one. And I'm going to explain to you why I think that. So before Marcellus Barnes was knocked out of the Stanford game with back spasms, I don't think it was anything serious based on what Fran Brown was saying, and they feel good about him potentially playing this week. But he was knocked out due to back spasms. Before that, he was shadowing Alec Iomanner, the talented Stanford wide receiver who beat us in the end because, well, they didn't double team him. But you get the idea. Marcellus Barnes was matched up with him one-on-one. And not only that, he was traveling with him. Most of the time with corners, they stick to one side of the field. But with Marcellus Barnes and Alec Iomanner, he was following him. He was following Alec Iomanner until he was knocked out of the game with the back spasms. So it's possible that this staff views him as the overall cornerback one on the team, but at the very least, from what we definitively know on the depth chart, he is a starting corner. So what happened to Devin Grant? Did Devin Grant fall off the face of the planet? No, he did not. Devin Grant is still in the lineup as a starter, in fact. Devin Grant is the Buffalo transfer from this offseason. He is now the starting star, formerly Justin Barron's position. And to not complicate things too much, he is the starting nickel, back, which is the fifth defensive back on the field. Syracuse runs a 4-2-5 defensive scheme, so that would make Devin Grant a starter on the defense. Still, he is just changing his position. Now, the reason why they're making this move, and Fran Brown mentioned it, it's because during the Stanford game, they made the move, and they wanted to get all of their best players on the field at the same time. So that is why they made this decision. Totally fine with that. Let's see how Devin Grant holds up as the starting nickelback for this team. Now let's move on, because it's a ripple effect, right? We talked about how the starting corner is Marcellus Barnes, the backup's Greg Delane. What happened to Devin Grant? Now we know what happened to Devin Grant, but what happened to Justin Barron? Because he just took Justin Barron's position. I'm glad you asked that question. Justin Barron, normally the starting nickel, and he was honorable mention All ACC last season with it on one hand for about half the year. Well, he's now the starting weak side linebacker, which is very interesting. The eye test and Pro Football Focus will tell you that Justin Barron in the first two games of the season was not on his A game. He was not on his A game. The eye test will tell you that, but more importantly, Pro Football Focus will tell you that with their grades. Against Ohio, he did not have a good day. A 42.9 grade on Pro Football Focus. That's bad. Now, he did improve against Georgia Tech, but still it's not very good. It's 59.9. There is significant improvement, but it's like you're going from the basement to the ground level. You're not rising. You're rising a lot, but relative to the surroundings, you haven't really risen at all. But the encouraging thing about Justin Barron is that he did play much better in the Stanford game. He had a 71.4 grade, which is pretty solid, and he was actually third on the defense. And his tackling grade was a 77.2, which you're getting on the almost the elite territory of Pro Football Focus, a 77.2 tackling grade. That's really good. That is really, really good. So he moved to linebacker during the game, and he played his best game of the season. So overall, it worked out. And that is why the staff is continuing with this lineup. So Justin Barron is now the starting weak side linebacker for Syracuse football for this game against Holy Cross on Saturday. So again, a ripple effect. If Justin Barron is now the starting weak side linebacker, where is Derek McDonald? Derek McDonald is now the starting middle linebacker with James Hurd officially as the backup middle linebacker. Once again, Syracuse is playing a little bit shorthanded on defense. They do not have all ACC linebacker Marlo Wax in the lineup. He is still recovering from his lower body injury. So with that, Syracuse for the first few games had James Hurd as a starting linebacker on this team. Not anymore. Derek McDonald is now the starting middle linebacker. They made that change during the Stanford game, and McDonald graded really well. He had a 77.8 Pro Football Focus grade at middle linebacker against Stanford. It was one of his best games of the season, a bright spot on the defense. So I could see why Syracuse once again is maintaining that level. They are keeping Derek McDonald as the starting middle linebacker for this team. Okay, so those are the 4 changes that Syracuse football made on defense. It's a lot, so I will summarize it for you all right now in this moment, okay? Marcellus Barnes, the true freshman, is now a starting corner. Devin Grant is now a starting nickelback. That is instead of Justin Barron. Justin Barron is now the weak side linebacker for this team, the starting weak side linebacker. He played really well against Stanford in that position. And finally, Derek McDonald is now the starting middle linebacker instead of James Hurd. James Hurd is now the backup middle linebacker. Tons of changes to Syracuse's defense. So with the receiver shakeup and the changes on defense, what do we make of it? I'm going to answer that for you right after this. Hey, NFL fans, you can start the season with a big return on FanDuel, America's #1 sports book. So when you get a hunch in the middle of a game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. You'll get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place your first $5 bet. And congratulations to the Buffalo Bills fans who are watching or listening to this podcast. You guys absolutely spanked the Jaguars. And by the way, Trevor Lawrence, he stinks, okay? He stinks, all right? But anyways, next week for Buffalo is Sunday night on the road at Baltimore. That's going to be a tough game for you guys. And maybe for the only time this season, Buffalo is an underdog, or at least in the regular season, Buffalo is an underdog in this one. They are 1.5 points underdogs to the Ravens on Sunday night. So if you want to bet that, feel free on FanDuel. That is FanDuel.com. So we've gone over all the lineup changes that Syracuse football is making for its upcoming matchup with Holy Cross on Saturday. What do we make of it? Leave a comment in the comment section below what these lineup changes signal to you. I'm going to give you my thoughts on it right now. Now, Friday night was obviously not the outcome that any Syracuse fan watching or listening, which is most of you, if you are a fan of a different team, I understand the entertainment value. But anyways, it was obviously not the outcome that we wanted for most of us. We want Syracuse to win. They did not. They didn't get the job done. And what this depth chart tells me is that this coaching staff is not afraid to make changes. They are not. We have seen them make adjustments already during this season, during games, and now on depth charts, right? We can recall moving Fidel Diggs to linebacker against Georgia Tech. Against Stanford, they made all those changes with Derek McDonald going to middle linebacker, Justin Barron going to weak side linebacker. You get the idea. They are not afraid to make changes with their lineup, with their personnel, even their scheme during games. They are not afraid whatsoever. And sometimes you can look at lineup changes and say, is a team panicking? Are they doing too much? Right? I think it's fair to wonder that sometimes, but in this case, I don't. I don't think this staff is panicking at all. I think they're making the right decision for 2 reasons. The first of which is that the moves actually align with what they did and what worked against Stanford. Not what didn't work against Stanford, what did work against Stanford, the adjustments they did make. The Orange didn't come ready to play in this game against Stanford, but through the middle portion and then towards the end, the defense stiffened. It wasn't until the last drive of the game where the Stanford offense woke up. We don't need to dive too much into the ending of that game again, because honestly, it frustrates me like crazy that it still happened. I am glad that Fran Brown in his press conference did take accountability for it, right? That is DART. That is what the A stands for, accountability. He took accountability for that. But overall, the moves, they align with what they did and what worked against Stanford. So that's number one, why I don't think the staff is panicking with all their moves they're making. Okay, number two. This is where we all got to be a little bit honest. Okay? They're playing Holy Cross. This is an FCS school. All right? You're not guaranteed to win, right? You still got to show up. You still got to play. But it's one of those games where you're looking for more than just your starters playing. You want to get some of your reserves in the game too, because you're hoping to absolutely annihilate this team. Do what you are supposed to do. This isn't like Stanford, who is a perceived bottom feeder in the ACC. That's still a Power 4 conference, the ACC. Okay, that's still a conference opponent, and we learned it the hard way. Holy Cross is FCS. Syracuse should have absolutely no trouble with this one. So this is honestly the game where you can experiment. You can make changes to your lineup and see what you like, see what you don't like, right? This is the game to do it, to test some things out. Play some true freshmen you won't normally play. Play some backups. You get the point, right? Just for some more context for you all. Dino Babers, the head coach of Syracuse football from 2016 to last year. He went 41-55 overall with Syracuse. Obviously not a good record at all. 41-55 in 8 years. Even then, he never came close to losing to an FCS school. Dino Babers was 7-0 against FCS competition. That's a good start. And an average margin of victory of nearly 46 points. So on average, if you do the math, they are winning by a combined 6 or 7 touchdowns on average against FCS competition. I get it. That is the past. And this is a new coaching staff. This is a different roster than in years past. But come on. They're playing Holy Cross. They should win this game by 6 or 7 touchdowns like they have been doing in the past. They should easily walk away with a win in this game. So, with that being said, the overall thoughts are that no, the coaching staff is not panicking with all of these moves. They are doing what went well against Holy Cross. They are sticking with those lineup changes. And on top of that, they understand that this is the game, hopefully, to try some new things out. It's the game to show new personnel. See what you got. I would love to see, because Emmanuel Ross actually is listed on the depth chart. I didn't really talk about it with the receiver shakeup because it wasn't too much of a shakeup. He did not play in the Stanford game due to injury. Hopefully he's good to go for Saturday, but he's one of those players that I would love to see on the field against Holy Cross. I would love to see him catch a few balls, play the second half. Right? I mean, I guess I'm teasing more of the podcasts coming up later in the week, but also Michael Johnson Jr., the backup quarterback for Syracuse football. How is he going to look? Maybe this is the game that we do see him play. Hopefully Kyle McCord doesn't have to play all 60 minutes. That would be a problem. So the point being is that this is the game to see what you got, and make some changes to your depth chart and see what works. If it doesn't work, it's not going to hurt you because you're still going to probably win anyway. So let's just see what happens. I'm in favor of what the coaching staff is doing with this lineup for this game. Once again, Syracuse is facing Holy Cross this Saturday at noon. Thank you for making Locked On Syracuse your first listen today. For your second listen, go to Locked On College Football. From NIL deals to never-ending conference realignment rumors, and there's been a lot of them recently, Spencer McLaughlin has you covered this season on the gridiron. Find Locked On College Football on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts. And folks, thank you all so much for watching. Thank you all so much for listening. If you like this video, click that like button. And if you really liked it, subscribe to the channel, turn on those notifications so you know right away when I am dropping the next podcast. And